Caleb Powell jammed his knucklebone deep into the Ventaxian counselor's compound eye socket, jamming it through the gelatinous goo until he felt the satisfying crunch of a chitinous optic stalk. As the rest of the Ventaxian council lunged forward, human and insectoid limbs tangled together in a blur of violence. A rush of adrenaline propelled Caleb against the 7-foot-tall insectoids, dodging their reaping, razor-sharp claws as he wrenched a pistol from his waistband. Caleb started blasting, yellow blood and shattered carapace spraying across the glossy black council chamber. Hours earlier, Caleb arrived on the Ventaxian homeworld for a pivotal summit, hoping to establish a peace treaty between humanity and the technologically superior Ventaxians. But now, locked in hand-to-claw combat with a dozen enraged insectoids, Caleb realized the Ventaxians had zero interest in diplomacy. His only chance was violence and raw human grit. The Ventaxian High Counselor, a mountainous creature of spiked chitin and muscle, rushed Caleb and smashed him to the floor. Caleb snarled as he wrestled with the creature's 4 powerful arms, grappling desperately to keep its serrated pincers from closing around his neck. Caleb glanced toward the council chamber's massive ornate doors. They were sealed shut. Caleb was alone. Billions of human lives depended on him getting out of this chamber, alive with the intel he'd uncovered. If Caleb failed here, humanity would be annihilated by a massive Ventaxian invasion fleet already en route to Earth. Locked in a death struggle with an overwhelming force of deadly aliens, one thought crystallized in Caleb's mind. These fucking bugs have no idea what humans are capable of. Even as Caleb struggled beneath the High Counselor's crushing weight, the argument continued to rage around him. The Ventaxian Council shouted and chattered, their words devolving into a cacophony of clicking and hissing. Suddenly, Caleb noticed something strange at the center of the council table. A purple orb, pulsing with an eerie inner light, seemed to be embedded in the glossy black surface. As Caleb stared at it, he felt a deep, unsettling hum vibrating in his bones. The orb flared brightly, and a holographic image sprang to life above the table. Caleb's eyes widened as he recognized the sprawling human colony of New Eden, nestled on a verdant, Earth-like world. Tharos, one of the counselors, stabbed a clawed finger at the image. "You see, the humans have violated our territory, breaking the treaty they signed in their own blood." Caleb's mind raced. He knew with absolute certainty that New Eden was well within human space, light years from any Ventaxian claim. This was a blatant lie, a flimsy pretext for the war the insectoids craved. As Caleb opened his mouth to protest, he noticed the counselors growing more agitated by the second. Their compound eyes flickered with a strange light, and their mandibles clicked and clattered like a swarm of enraged locusts. Caleb's gaze darted back to the pulsing orb. Could it be influencing them somehow, driving them to new heights of aggression? He had no proof, but the suspicion grew in his mind like a cancer. The tension in the room reached a breaking point as Caleb struggled to find the words that could avert the looming catastrophe. The fate of billions hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. Caleb's implanted neural link crackled to life, a sudden intrusion amidst the chaos engulfing the Ventaxian Council chamber. It was a message from Dr. Marcus Stein, his colleague, and a brilliant xenobiologist who had dedicated years to studying the physiology and behavior of the insectoid species. "Caleb, I found something crucial," Marcus's voice urged, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "The Ventaxians have a weakness, a specific frequency that can paralyze their nervous systems. I'm sending you the data now, along with instructions on how to create a sonic emitter using your diplomatic kit. It's our only chance." As the data streamed into Caleb's implant, he quickly processed the information, his mind racing. He glanced around the chamber, taking in the enraged Ventaxians, their accusations growing more heated by the second. He knew he had to act fast. Caleb's hands moved beneath the council table, rummaging through his diplomatic kit with practiced efficiency. He kept his body positioned to shield his actions from the Ventaxians' view, his heart pounding in his chest as he began to assemble the makeshift sonic emitter according to Marcus's instructions. Across the table, Tharos's agitation reached a fever pitch. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a staccato rhythm that sent shivers down Caleb's spine. The counselor's exoskeleton shifted colors, a dizzying pattern that seemed to pulse in time with the throbbing purple orb at the center of the table. Caleb's fingers worked feverishly, piecing together the emitter with a sense of urgency that bordered on desperation. He could feel Tharos's gaze boring into him, the Ventaxian's compound eyes flickering with a malevolent light. Caleb knew that the counselor was preparing to strike, his clawed hands tensing in anticipation. But Caleb remained focused on his task, his jaw clenched with determination. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, and he refused to let them down. He thought of the billions of lives that hung in the balance, the families and loved ones who would be lost if the Ventaxian's deception went unchallenged. Just as Tharos rose from his seat, his clawed hands outstretched and reaching for Caleb, the human diplomat's finger found the activation switch on the sonic emitter. With a final, decisive motion, he pressed it. A high-pitched, pulsing tone filled the council chamber, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very foundations of the building. The Ventaxians convulsed, their exoskeletons vibrating violently as the frequency assaulted their nervous systems. One by one they collapsed, their bodies hitting the glossy black floor with sickening thuds. Caleb stood alone amidst the fallen council members, the sonic emitter clutched tightly in his hand. The weight of his actions settled upon him like a physical burden, the realization of what he had done sinking in with cold clarity. He had taken a desperate, irreversible step, one that would have consequences far beyond this chamber. But as he looked around at the motionless Ventaxians, Caleb knew that he had no choice. The alternative, a war that would consume both their species, was too horrific to contemplate. He had bought humanity a chance, however fleeting it might be. Caleb's gaze drifted to the pulsing purple orb, its light now seeming to mock him with its sinister glow. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this device than met the eye, that it held secrets that could unravel the very fabric of the galaxy. With the council members sprawled across the chamber floor, their chitinous exoskeletons still vibrating from the sonic assault, Caleb moved quickly. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from the pulsating orb to the gleaming black surfaces of the council table. There had to be something here, some evidence to support his growing suspicions about the orb's true nature. Caleb's fingers probed the edges of the table, searching for any hidden compartments or secret panels. As he felt along the underside of the table, his fingertips brushed against a small, almost imperceptible seam. He pressed inward, and a hidden drawer slid open with a soft hiss. Inside the compartment, Caleb found a set of data crystals, each one labeled with intricate Ventaxian glyphs. He retrieved the crystals and held them up to his neural implant, allowing the device to scan and translate the alien script. As the implant processed the data, Caleb's eyes widened in horror. The crystals contained detailed plans for a massive Ventaxian invasion of human space, complete with schematics for advanced weapons designed to exploit weaknesses in human physiology. The scope of the planned assault was staggering, a coordinated strike against dozens of human colonies and outposts. But it was the final piece of information that sent a chill down Caleb's spine. The pulsating orb, he discovered, was no mere decoration or symbol of Ventaxian power. It was a prototype of a terrifying new weapon, a psychic amplifier capable of manipulating the thoughts and emotions of other species. The orb had been used to influence the council members, driving them to new heights of aggression and irrationality. Caleb pocketed the data crystals, his mind racing as he began to formulate a plan. He had to find a way to expose the Ventaxian plot, to warn humanity of the impending danger and prevent the invasion before it was too late. Suddenly the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the council chamber, growing louder with each passing second. Caleb turned to face the entrance, his body tensing as he prepared for another confrontation. A group of Ventaxian guards burst into the room, their plasma rifles trained on Caleb. The guards parted, revealing a towering figure clad in an ornate black exoskeleton. It was the Ventaxian Emperor himself, Zaxxon, his compound eyes fixed on Caleb with a piercing intensity. Zaxxon's mandibles clicked in a menacing pattern as he strode forward, his voice dripping with malice. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he hissed, his words sharp and biting. "A human spy, caught in the act of assaulting the Ventaxian Council. I think it's time we teach your species a lesson in respect." Caleb stood his ground, his jaw clenched as he met Zaxxon's gaze. He knew that he was outnumbered and outgunned, but he refused to show fear in the face of the Ventaxian Emperor. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, and he would not fail them, no matter the cost. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the impending confrontation. Caleb's mind raced as he tried to calculate his next move, knowing that every second counted. The Ventaxian guards closed in, their weapons humming with deadly energy, as Zaxxon loomed before him like a nightmarish spectre of doom. In that moment, Caleb knew that he was standing on the precipice of a war that could consume the galaxy, a conflict that would reshape the very fabric of existence, and he was the only one who could stop it. Caleb's eyes darted between the advancing Ventaxian guards and the towering figure of Emperor Zaxxon. His mind raced, calculating his next move as his fingers brushed against the hidden data crystals in his pocket. He knew that the information contained within them was humanity's only hope of stopping the impending Ventaxian invasion. With a subtle movement, Caleb activated his emergency beacon, sending a distress signal to the nearest human fleet. He knew that reinforcements would take time to arrive, precious minutes that he didn't have. He needed to find a way to stall the Ventaxians and protect the data crystals at all costs. Caleb's gaze fell upon the pulsating orb embedded in the council table. The device hummed with an eerie energy, its purple light casting sinister shadows across the chamber. In a desperate gambit, Caleb lunged forward and grabbed the orb, holding it aloft with his thumb hovering over the activation button. "One more step, and I'll unleash this weapon on all of you," Caleb bluffed, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. He hoped that the Ventaxians would be unwilling to risk exposure to the orb's psychic influence. Zaxxon hesitated, his compound eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. The Ventaxian guards shifted uneasily, their plasma rifles trained on Caleb's chest. "You're bluffing, human," Zaxxon growled, taking a step forward. His exoskeleton shimmered with a strange reflective coating. "You have no idea how to control that device." Caleb's thumb pressed down on the activation button, and the orb began to glow with an intense purple light. The Ventaxian guards, caught off guard, stumbled backward, their mandibles clicking in agitation. Zaxxon, however, seemed unaffected. He strode forward, his clawed hands reaching for the orb. "Fool," he hissed, "did you really think we would create a weapon that could be used against us?" With a lightning-fast movement, Zaxxon lunged at Caleb, his razor-sharp claws slicing through the air. Caleb, reacting on instinct, hurled the orb directly at Zaxxon's face. The device shattered upon impact, sending shards of glowing crystal cascading to the floor. As the shards fell, Caleb's eyes widened in realization. The device was not just a psychic amplifier, but also a containment vessel for a highly unstable energy source. The shards began to glow with an intense white light, their brightness increasing with each passing second. Caleb barely had time to dive for cover behind the council table before the shards exploded in a blinding flash of energy. The force of the blast sent him sprawling, his ears ringing and his vision swimming. He could feel the heat of the explosion washing over him, singeing his hair and clothes. Through the haze of smoke and debris, Caleb caught a glimpse of Zaxxon and his guards. They lay motionless on the floor, their exoskeletons cracked and scorched by the blast. The once imposing figure of the Ventaxian Emperor was now a twisted, unrecognizable heap of shattered chitin. Caleb struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He knew that he had bought himself some time, but at a great cost. The orb's destruction had unleashed a force that even the Ventaxians couldn't control, and he had no idea what the consequences would be. As he stumbled towards the council chamber's exit, Caleb's thoughts turned to the data crystals in his pocket. They were his only hope of exposing the Ventaxian plot and preventing a catastrophic war. He had to find a way to get them into the right hands, no matter the cost. The sound of distant alarms echoed through the corridors, a grim reminder that his actions had not gone unnoticed. Caleb steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that every step he took could be his last. But he refused to give up, refused to let the Ventaxians win. He would fight until his last breath to protect humanity, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. Caleb staggered through the smoke-filled corridors, his mind racing with the weight of his mission. The fate of billions hung in the balance, and he was their only hope. As he pushed onwards into the heart of the Ventaxian stronghold, he could feel the eyes of the galaxy upon him, watching and waiting for the outcome of this desperate gambit. As the acrid smoke from the explosion dissipated, Caleb cautiously peered over the edge of the council table, his ears still ringing from the deafening blast. The sight that greeted him was one of unimaginable horror. Where once stood the imposing figures of Emperor Zaxxon and his Ventaxian guards, now loomed grotesque crystalline statues. Their exoskeletons had fused with the shattered remnants of the pulsating orb, their bodies twisted and warped into nightmarish forms. An eerie purple light emanated from the crystalline abominations, casting a sickly glow across the devastated council chamber. Caleb could feel an unsettling energy radiating from the statues, a palpable sense of wrongness that set his teeth on edge. The explosion had undoubtedly alerted the entire Ventaxian command center to his presence. Caleb knew he had to act fast. He grabbed a plasma rifle from the petrified grip of one of the transformed guards, its weight reassuring in his hands. With the data crystals securely stored in his diplomatic pouch, Caleb made his way out of the chamber and into the winding corridors of the command center. As he navigated the labyrinthine halls, Caleb's mind raced with unanswered questions. What was the true nature of the pulsating orb? Why were the Ventaxians so hell-bent on invading human space? And most pressingly, how could he prevent an interstellar war that threatened to consume billions of lives? Suddenly, an ear-splitting alarm pierced the air, echoing through the command center's metallic corridors. The sound of marching feet, dozens of Ventaxian soldiers, grew louder with each passing second. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he ducked into a nearby alcove, pressing his body against the cold alien metal. He held his breath as the soldiers marched past, their plasma rifles held at the ready, their compound eyes scanning the corridors for any sign of the intruder. Caleb remained perfectly still, not daring to move a muscle until the sound of their footsteps receded into the distance. Just as he thought he was in the clear, Caleb felt the cold, unyielding press of metal against the back of his skull. A raspy, menacing voice whispered in his ear, "Don't move, human, or I'll splatter your brains across the wall." Caleb slowly raised his hands, the plasma rifle clattering to the ground at his feet. He turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of his captor, a grizzled Ventaxian soldier, his carapace marred by a jagged scar that ran from his compound eye to his mandibles. "Who are you?" Caleb asked, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. The soldier chuckled, a harsh grating sound that sent shivers down Caleb's spine. "I am Commander Zavak, head of Ventaxian Special Operations, and you, human, are my ticket to glory." Caleb's mind raced as he tried to assess his options. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and now captured by one of the Ventaxians' most elite soldiers. The data crystals, humanity's only hope for survival, weighed heavily in his diplomatic pouch. Zavak pressed the barrel of his plasma rifle harder against Caleb's skull, the heat from the weapon searing his skin. "Move," the commander hissed, "and don't even think about trying anything clever." Caleb complied, his mind desperately seeking a way out of this impossible situation. As Zavak marched him through the command center's corridors, past the petrified remains of Ventaxian soldiers caught in the orb's blast, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led to his own execution. The weight of his failure threatened to crush him. He had come so close to uncovering the truth behind the Ventaxians' invasion plans, only to be captured at the last moment. The fate of humanity, of countless billions across the galaxy, rested on his shoulders. And now, as he walked towards an uncertain future, a prisoner of the very creatures he had sought to stop, Caleb couldn't help but wonder if he had already sealed humanity's fate. Finally they reached a massive circular door, its surface etched with intricate Ventaxian glyphs. Zavak pressed his clawed hand against a biometric scanner, and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. Caleb's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. The chamber was filled with row upon row of stasis pods, each one containing a Ventaxian soldier in full battle armor. There were hundreds, if not thousands of them, an army waiting to be awakened. Zavak shoved Caleb forward, the humans stumbling into the chamber. The commander's mandibles clicked with a sadistic glee as he hissed, "Welcome to the future of the Ventaxian Empire, human, and the end of your pathetic species." Zavak shoved Caleb forward, pressing the cold barrel of his plasma rifle into the small of the human's back. They moved through narrow, dimly lit passages, deep within the bowels of the Ventaxian command center. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning circuitry and the coppery tang of spilled blood. As they walked, Zavak's mandibles clicked in a rhythmic pattern, his voice a low guttural whisper. "I've grown tired of the Emperor's madness," he said, his compound eyes glinting in the shadows. "This obsession with invading human space will be the death of our species." Caleb glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the smoke and dust. Zavak's exoskeleton shimmered as he moved, the jagged scar across his carapace catching the dim light. "I've been working in secret, sabotaging weapons systems, leaking intel to your people. Anything to slow down the invasion." Caleb's mind raced, the weight of the data crystals in his pouch suddenly feeling heavier. He saw an opportunity, a chance to end the conflict before it began. "Zavak," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "A war between our species would be catastrophic for both sides. We have to stop this before it's too late." Zavak's grip on the plasma rifle tightened, his claws clicking against the metal. "And how do you propose we do that, human?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Caleb reached into his pouch, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the data crystals. "I have proof," he said, pulling out the crystals and holding them up to the light. "The Emperor has been lying to your people. The pulsating orb, the invasion plans, all of it. It's all here." Zavak's compound eyes widened as he scanned the data crystals, his mandibles twitching with each revelation. The extent of the Emperor's deception, the true nature of the orb, all laid bare before him. For a long moment, he was silent, his exoskeleton shifting colors as he processed the information. Finally he spoke, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "We have to get these crystals to your fleet," he said, his grip on the plasma rifle loosening. "We have to stop this war before it begins." Caleb nodded, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. Together they made their way towards the hangar bay, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Suddenly the sound of plasma fire erupted behind them, searing bolts of energy scorching the walls. Caleb and Zavak spun around, their weapons at the ready. A group of Ventaxian soldiers loyal to the Emperor had found them, their compound eyes glinting with malice. The firefight was fierce, plasma bolts crisscrossing the dimly lit corridors. Caleb and Zavak worked together, their movements fluid and precise as they took down soldier after soldier. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning chitin. Just as they reached the hangar bay, a stray plasma bolt struck Caleb in the shoulder, the searing energy tearing through his flesh. He cried out in pain, his vision blurring as he collapsed to the ground. The data crystals clattered to the floor beside him. Zavak hesitated, his compound eyes darting between Caleb and the approaching soldiers. For a moment he seemed torn, his Ventaxian instincts warring with his newfound alliance. Then, with a low growl, he reached down and pulled Caleb to his feet, supporting the wounded human as they stumbled towards a waiting fighter craft. Caleb clutched the data crystals in his fist. As the fighter rocketed out of the hangar bay, Caleb leaned his head back in the seat, the tears evaporating off his face in the hypersonic airflow. He looked down at his blood-soaked shoulder and the glowing data crystals in his fist. The future of humanity, perhaps the galaxy itself, depended on them getting these crystals into the right hands. "They're gaining on us," Caleb shouted over the roar of the engines, his eyes fixed on the sensor display. The Ventaxian interceptors closed in like a swarm of angry hornets, their plasma cannons peppering the fighters' shields with a relentless barrage. Zavak's compound eyes narrowed in concentration, his clawed hands flying over the controls. "Hold on," he growled, his mandibles clicking with each word. "This is going to get rough." The fighter banked hard to the left, skimming the surface of a towering canyon wall. Jagged rocks and twisted spires flashed past the cockpit, so close that Caleb could see the individual grains in the stone. He held his breath, certain that they would be smashed to pieces at any moment. But Zavak was in his element, weaving the craft through the maze of canyons with a skill that bordered on artistry. Caleb, his mind racing, pulled up the fighter's weapon systems on the control panel. The interface was alien, the symbols and glyphs confounding. But Caleb's years of studying Ventaxian technology paid off. With a few quick taps, he brought the rear-facing plasma cannons online. The interceptors closed in, their hulls glinting in the harsh sunlight. Caleb took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the trigger. He waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity, until the lead interceptor filled his targeting reticle. Caleb fired, a lance of searing plasma leaping from the fighter's cannons. The interceptor vanished in a blinding flash of light, its shattered remains tumbling into the canyon below. But there were too many, the remaining interceptors swarming around the fighter like angry bees. Zavak jinked and weaved, the craft shuddering under the onslaught of plasma fire. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, the shields rapidly depleting under the relentless assault. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, a massive shadow fell across the canyon. Caleb looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. A gargantuan creature, its serpentine body covered in glistening scales, rose from the depths of the canyon like a leviathan from the deep. The Ventaxian dreadworm, a creature of myth and legend, opened its cavernous maw and roared, the sound shaking the very foundations of the canyon. The interceptors, caught off guard, scattered like leaves in a gale. But the dreadworm was faster, its massive jaws snapping shut around the nearest interceptor. The craft crumpled like a tin can, its pilot's screams abruptly cut off as the dreadworm swallowed it whole. Zavak, seeing an opportunity, banked the fighter hard to the right, aiming directly for the dreadworm's gaping mouth. Caleb's heart leapt into his throat, his mind reeling at the sheer insanity of the plan. "Are you crazy?" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "We'll be torn to shreds." But Zavak didn't respond, his compound eyes fixed on the dreadworm's maw. The fighter shot forward, the cockpit shaking violently as they passed through the creature's razor-sharp teeth. For a moment, Caleb was certain that they would be crushed, the dreadworm's jaws closing around them like a vice. But then they were through, the fighter emerging into a cavernous chamber that could only be the dreadworm's gullet. The walls pulsed with a sickly, bioluminescent light, the air thick with the stench of decay. And there, nestled in the heart of the dreadworm's body, was a sight that made Caleb's blood run cold. A hidden Ventaxian research facility, its walls lined with tanks containing grotesque, half-formed creatures. The results of the Ventaxians' twisted experiments with the dreadworm's DNA. Zavak set the fighter down on a narrow ledge, the landing gear crunching on the bone-strewn floor. Caleb stumbled from the cockpit, his shoulder screaming with pain, his mind reeling from the implications of what he was seeing. Zavak's mandibles clicked in a grim rhythm. "The key to the Ventaxians' victory," he said, his voice heavy with disgust. "A breeding ground for a new kind of soldier, one designed specifically to destroy humanity." Caleb moved deeper into the facility, his footsteps echoing on the metal walkways. He peered into the tanks, his stomach churning at the sight of the abominations within. Twisted, malformed creatures, their bodies a nightmarish fusion of Ventaxian and dreadworm DNA. And there at the center of it all was a sight that made Caleb's heart skip a beat, the pulsating orb, its purple light casting eerie shadows on the walls. But it was different now, its surface etched with intricate patterns and glyphs. "The orb," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just a psychic amplifier, it's a key component in the creation of these things." Zavak nodded, his compound eyes glinting in the dim light. "The Ventaxians have been planning this for years," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I had no idea how far they were willing to go." Caleb's mind raced, the implications of this discovery crashing over him like a tidal wave. The data crystals in his pocket, the ones he had risked everything to obtain, were more crucial than ever. They held the key to stopping the Ventaxians' twisted plan, to preventing a war that could consume the galaxy. "We have to get out of here," Caleb said, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "We have to warn humanity, to stop this madness before it's too late." Zavak nodded, his mandibles clicking in agreement. Together they fought their way back to the fighter, plasma bolts searing the air around them as they battled through the facility's automated defenses. The dreadworm roared, its body shaking with the force of the explosions. Caleb and Zavak leapt into the cockpit, the fighter's engines roaring to life. They shot forward, weaving through the dreadworm's teeth and bursting out into the open sky. Behind them, the research facility exploded, the dreadworm's roars echoing across the canyon as the twisted abominations within were consumed in a fiery inferno. Caleb leaned back in his seat, his shoulder throbbing, his mind reeling with the weight of what they had discovered. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, the odds stacked against them at every turn. But with the data crystals in his pocket and Zavak at his side, Caleb knew that they had a chance to stop the Ventaxians, to prevent a war that could destroy everything they held dear. As the Ventaxian fighter rocketed away from the smoldering ruins of the hidden research facility, a shrill beep from the comms console shattered the tense silence in the cockpit. Caleb, his shoulder throbbing with every labored breath, leaned forward to inspect the incoming signal. "It's a distress call," Caleb said, his brow furrowing as he deciphered the message. "From a human colony on Proxima Theta. They're under attack by Ventaxian forces." Zavak's compound eyes flickered, his clawed hands tightening on the controls. "The colony is close," he rasped, "but your fleet is still en route. They won't make it in time." Caleb met Zavak's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. They were the colony's only hope. With a curt nod, Zavak banked the fighter hard to starboard, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they hurtled towards Proxima Theta. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the acrid stench of smoke and burning metal filled the cockpit. The colony stretched out beneath them, a once thriving settlement, now reduced to a hellscape of shattered buildings and raging fires. Caleb's heart clenched as he saw the bodies of human colonists strewn across the rubble-strewn streets, their lifeless eyes staring up at the smoke-choked sky. Amidst the carnage, a scene of unimaginable horror unfolded. A group of Ventaxian super-soldiers, their bodies twisted and deformed by the dreadworm's DNA, rampaged through the colony with terrifying speed and savagery. They tore through the remaining defenders like a hot knife through butter, their grotesquely muscled limbs and razor-sharp claws making short work of the colonists' defenses. Zavak set the fighter down in a clearing amidst the chaos, the landing gear sinking into the blood-soaked earth. Caleb grabbed his plasma rifle and leaped from the cockpit, Zavak close behind. The air was thick with the stench of death and the screams of the dying, a cacophony of suffering that threatened to overwhelm Caleb's senses. They charged into the fray, plasma bolts sizzling through the air as they engaged the super-soldiers in a brutal, close-quarters battle. Caleb ducked and weaved, his rifle bucking in his hands as he fired shot after shot into the monstrous creatures. Beside him, Zavak fought with a savage grace, his claws and mandibles ripping through the super-soldier's flesh with sickening ease. But even as they fought, Caleb noticed something strange about the super soldiers' movements. They seemed to be converging on a specific building, a low, reinforced structure at the heart of the colony. With a sudden flash of realization, Caleb understood. It was the colony's central data hub, a repository of vital research and information. "Zavak," Caleb shouted over the din of battle. "They're after the data. We have to stop them." Zavak nodded, his mandibles clicking in acknowledgement. Together they fought their way towards the data hub, plasma bolts and shattered concrete filling the air around them. Caleb felt a searing pain in his side as a super soldier's claw found its mark, but he pushed through, his mind focused on the task at hand. As they reached the data hub's entrance, Zavak turned to face the oncoming horde, his rifle spitting death into their ranks. "Go," he snarled, his voice barely audible over the roar of battle. "I'll hold them off." Caleb hesitated for a split second, his heart torn between his duty and his newfound bond with the Ventaxian renegade. But he knew what had to be done. With a final nod of gratitude, he plunged into the data hub, the screams of the dying and the howls of the super soldiers echoing in his ears. Inside the hub, a scene of controlled chaos greeted him. A group of scientists huddled around a central computer console, their fingers flying across the keys as they frantically uploaded the colony's data to a secure off-site location. They looked up as Caleb entered, their eyes wide with fear and desperation. "We're almost done," one of them said, his voice trembling. "But the upload is taking too long. They'll be here any second." Caleb nodded, his jaw set with determination. He took up a position by the door, his rifle aimed at the entrance. "I'll buy you as much time as I can," he said, his voice steady. "Just get that data uploaded." The scientists nodded, turning back to their work with renewed urgency. Caleb could hear the sounds of battle growing closer, the snarls of the super soldiers and the crack of Zavak's rifle, a chilling counterpoint to the hum of the computers. Suddenly the door burst inward, torn from its hinges by a massive clawed hand. The super soldiers poured into the room, their eyes blazing with a feral, inhuman rage. Caleb opened fire, his rifle bucking against his shoulder as he poured plasma into their ranks. Beside him, the scientists grabbed whatever weapons they could find. Metal pipes, shards of broken glass, anything to defend themselves. The battle was fierce and bloody, a desperate struggle against overwhelming odds. Caleb felt the sting of claws and the burn of plasma, but he fought on, driven by a primal need to protect the innocent and safeguard the future of his species. The scientists fought with a courage born of desperation, their makeshift weapons finding their mark again and again. Just as it seemed that all was lost, a shout of triumph rang out from the console. "It's done," one of the scientists cried, his face streaked with blood and sweat. "The upload is complete." Caleb felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. A super soldier, its body a mass of twisted muscle and razor-sharp bone, lunged forward, its claws aimed at the scientist's throat. Caleb leaped into its path, his rifle forgotten as he grappled with the creature, his hands seeking any weakness, any vulnerability. With a final desperate effort, Caleb managed to wrap his hands around the super soldier's neck, twisting with all his strength. The creature's spine snapped with a sickening crack, its body going limp in Caleb's grasp. He let it fall, his chest heaving with exertion and pain. The remaining super soldiers, seeing their comrade fall, hesitated, their primitive minds struggling to comprehend the human's display of raw, unyielding strength. Caleb seized the moment, grabbing a fallen plasma rifle and opening fire, his shots tearing through the creature's ranks with deadly precision. As the last super soldier fell, Caleb slumped against the console, his body battered and bleeding. The scientists gathered around him, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "We did it," Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The data is safe." "The colony is lost," Zavak said, his voice heavy with regret. "But we have saved something far more valuable." Caleb nodded, struggling to his feet with the help of the scientists. "We have to get the survivors out of here," he said, his mind already racing ahead to the next challenge. "We have to find a way to use this data to turn the tide of the war." Together they made their way out of the data hub, picking their way through the rubble and the bodies of the fallen. The few remaining colonists, shell-shocked and traumatized, huddled together in small groups, their eyes hollow with grief and loss. Caleb and Zavak gathered the survivors, leading them towards the spaceport at the edge of the colony. The journey was arduous, every step a struggle against pain and exhaustion, but they pushed on, driven by the knowledge that every life saved was a small victory against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. As they reached the spaceport, a deep, bone-rattling hum filled the air. Caleb looked up, his eyes widening in horror as a massive Ventaxian warship descended from the clouds, its plasma cannons aimed directly at the heart of the colony. Caleb and Zavak exchanged a grim look, the weight of their mission settling on their shoulders like a physical burden. They knew that this was only the beginning, that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they also knew that they had no choice but to fight on, to risk everything for the sake of the galaxy and the countless lives that hung in the balance. As the warship grew larger in the sky, its shadow falling across the shattered remains of the colony, Caleb felt a flicker of hope amidst the despair. They had the data, the key to unraveling the Ventaxian plot and ending the war. And they had each other, an unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of battle and sacrifice. Together they would stand against the darkness no matter the cost, for in the face of annihilation, the only choice was to fight, to rage against the dying of the light, until the very end. As the massive Ventaxian warship loomed overhead, its shadow engulfing the shattered remains of the colony, Caleb felt the weight of despair pressing down on him. The transport ship, filled with the few surviving colonists, sat exposed and vulnerable on the landing pad. Zavak's compound eyes glittered in the harsh light, his mandibles clicking as he turned to Caleb. "There's only one way," he rasped, his voice heavy with grim acceptance. "I'll fly the fighter craft directly into the warship's main plasma cannon. The chain reaction should destroy the entire vessel." Caleb's eyes widened, a protest rising in his throat. "No, Zavak, there has to be another way. We can't just give up." But Zavak was resolute, his exoskeleton shimmering with a strange, almost ethereal light. "This is the only way, Caleb. You must get the colonists to safety and deliver the data to your fleet. It's the only chance for our species, for any hope of peace." With that, Zavak pressed the data crystals and the colony's uploaded information into Caleb's hands. His claws lingered for a moment, a final, unspoken gesture of camaraderie and respect. Caleb watched, his heart heavy, as Zavak strode towards the Ventaxian fighter craft. The commander paused at the threshold, turning to face Caleb one last time. With a somber salute, a gesture that transcended species and culture, Zavak sealed his fate. The fighter craft roared to life, its engines screaming as it tore away from the landing pad. Caleb herded the colonists onto the transport, his mind numb with shock and grief. As he strapped himself into the pilot's seat, he couldn't tear his eyes away from Zavak's craft, now a distant speck against the looming bulk of the warship. Plasma fire erupted from the warship's cannons, a deadly barrage that filled the sky with searing light. Zavak's craft bobbed and weaved, a tiny mote dancing between the lethal beams. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he watched, transfixed by the desperate, heroic charge. And then, in a blinding flash, Zavak's craft slammed into the warship's main cannon. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath, the very fabric of space and time stretched taut. The explosion was cataclysmic, a searing blossom of light and fire that engulfed the warship's hull. Secondary detonations ripped through the vessel, its structure crumbling like a house of cards. Caleb watched, tears stinging his eyes, as the once mighty ship broke apart, massive fragments plummeting towards the planet's surface like meteors. With a shaking hand, Caleb engaged the transport's engines, the craft lurching away from the doomed colony. The colonists huddled together, their faces etched with fear and sorrow as they watched their homes, their lives, disappear beneath the falling debris. Suddenly the transport shuddered violently, alarms blaring in a cacophony of warning. Caleb's eyes darted to the readouts, his heart sinking as he saw the extent of the damage. A stray piece of debris had struck the transport, its jagged edges tearing through the hull and crippling the engines and life support. Caleb fought to keep the ship steady, his hands slick with blood from his wounded shoulder. The colonists cried out, their voices rising in a chorus of terror as the transport listed and groaned. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the huddled survivors. With a final desperate effort, Caleb managed to send a distress signal to the approaching human fleet. His vision blurred, the edges of the world turning grey as he slumped forward in his seat. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the vast expanse of space, cold and unforgiving, stretching out before him. The transport drifted, a crippled husk suspended in the void. Its occupants clung to each other, their breath fogging the air as the life support systems sputtered and died. They waited, hope and despair warring in their hearts, as the spectre of death loomed ever closer. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.